Ever wondered what really happens inside a Texas roadside diner once the neon lights flicker and the doors lock for the night? It isn't just about late-night coffee refills or greasy plates. There's a darker rhythm here, a set of unwritten rules whispered among the staff. Rules meant to keep something far worse than rowdy customers from slipping through. Tonight, I'm taking you inside the night shift, where every creak of the diner hides a story you were never meant to hear. My name is Jake, and 3 months ago, I thought I'd landed the perfect job at Moonrise Diner, a weathered establishment sitting like a beacon along Highway 87, somewhere between nowhere and the middle of nowhere, Texas. The pay was decent for night shift work, and the isolation suited me just fine. What I didn't expect were the rules. Not the ones posted on the employee break room wall, but the other ones. The ones that keep us alive. The first rule I learned wasn't written anywhere, but every staff member knew it by heart. The subtle nod, never a handshake. When regulars walked through that glass door after 11 p.m., you acknowledged them with a brief downward tilt of your head. Nothing more. Agnes, our night manager with silver hair twisted into a perpetual bun, pulled me aside during my second week when I cheerfully extended my hand to greet old Ezra, a weathered man who showed up every Tuesday like clockwork. "Boy," she whispered, her fingers digging into my forearm with surprising strength. "You never touched them directly. Never." Her eyes held a warning that made my stomach clench. The nod shows respect without contact. Contact means connection, and connection means they can find you when you're not here. I wanted to ask what she meant, but something in her expression stopped me cold. Instead, I watched how the other staff interacted with our late-night patrons. Beth, our waitress with tired eyes and a crooked smile, would nod to customers, and they would nod back, a silent dance of acknowledgement that felt almost ritualistic. The truckers, the insomniacs, the mysterious figures who appeared from the darkness, they all seemed to understand this unspoken protocol. But here's what chilled me to the bone. Sometimes, when I looked closely at these regular customers, their reflections in the diner's windows seemed slightly off, as if the glass was showing me something my eyes refused to see directly. The second part of this first rule involved understanding the usual and why modifications were absolutely forbidden after midnight. When Ezra sat in his corner booth, Beth would simply place a cup of black coffee and a slice of apple pie before him without a word. No sugar, no cream, no questions asked. During my third night, I made the rookie mistake of asking a woman in a faded floral dress if she wanted whipped cream on her pie. The entire diner fell silent. The coffee pot in my hand began to tremble as every pair of eyes turned toward me with expressions of barely concealed terror. The woman's smile never wavered, but something shifted in her features that made my vision blur at the edges. "Just the usual, honey," she said in a voice like autumn leaves scraping across pavement. After she left, Agnes grabbed me by the shoulders, her face pale as moonlight. "Never suggest changes to their orders. They come here for specific things, prepared specific ways. Start improvising, and they might decide to improvise with you." The coffee cup rule became my obsession after that warning. Empty cups sat like silent sentinels throughout the diner, each one a wordless request for attention. But these weren't ordinary refills. When someone's cup went empty after midnight, you filled it without engaging in conversation. No pleasantries about the weather, no asking about their day. The coffee was Colombian dark roast during normal hours, but Agnes kept a special pot brewing after 11 p.m. Something she called night blend that smelled like burnt herbs and made the air shimmer slightly above the surface. I learned to read the subtle signs. A cup pushed to the edge of the table meant regular coffee, but a cup turned upside down on its saucer meant the night blend. The first time I saw someone drink the night blend, their eyes seemed to reflect the diner's fluorescent lights like an animal's might. When they finished, They would always leave exact change down to the penny, never tipping, never looking back. The most unsettling aspect of the grease-stained greeting was how natural it all felt after a few weeks. My body seemed to understand these protocols on a cellular level, as if some primitive part of my brain recognized the necessity of these rules for survival. When I walked past the grill during those early morning hours, I could swear I heard whispers coming from beneath the metal surface, speaking in languages that predated English by centuries. One particularly busy Friday night, as I was wiping down tables in preparation for the 2 a.m. crowd, I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. The grease stains on the worn linoleum floor weren't random splatters from years of cooking. They formed patterns, intricate symbols and shapes that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm when the overhead lights flickered. Agnes caught me staring and shook her head slowly. "Those ain't accidents, son," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigeration units. "They're reminders, boundaries. Cross them the wrong way, and you'll understand why we follow the rules so carefully." That night, as my shift ended and dawn began to paint the Texas sky in shades of amber and rose, I realized that Moonrise Diner wasn't just a place that served food to travelers and insomniacs. It was a way station, a carefully maintained neutral ground where two worlds intersected. And the rules weren't suggestions or quirky traditions. They were a survival guide written in coffee stains and whispered warnings, designed to keep employees like me from becoming permanent fixtures in a much darker establishment than I'd ever imagined. As I walked to my car that morning, I could feel eyes watching me from the diner's windows, but when I turned back, all I saw was my own reflection staring back, looking somehow older than it had just hours before. The kitchen at Moonrise Diner operated under its own set of laws, and at the center of it all stood Dolores Martinez, the senior fry cook whose authority was absolute and unquestioned. She'd worked the night shift for 15 years, and her presence commanded respect that bordered on reverence. Dolores never raised her voice, never barked orders like kitchen managers I'd known before. Instead, she communicated through a complex system of gestures and glances that could convey everything from urgent warnings to detailed cooking instructions. During my 4th week, I witnessed the true extent of her unspoken authority when a new cook named Tommy tried to challenge her methods. Tommy was young, fresh out of culinary school, and full of ideas about efficiency and modernization. He lasted exactly 3 nights before requesting a transfer to the day shift, citing creative differences and recurring nightmares about sizzling sounds that followed him home. Dolores operated the grill with an almost supernatural precision, her movements flowing like a dancer who'd perfected her routine through decades of practice. But it was her ability to sense when something was wrong that truly set her apart from any cook I'd ever known. She would pause mid-flip, her spatula suspended in air, and slowly turn toward whichever staff member was about to make a potentially fatal mistake. Her dark eyes would lock onto theirs, and a barely perceptible shake of her head would course-correct behavior before disaster struck. The no-cut rule governed our busiest hours, typically between midnight and 3 a.m., when the highway brought us a steady stream of travelers seeking refuge from the endless Texas darkness. During these rushes, an unspoken agreement maintained order in what could have been chaos. Customers were served based on their arrival time and their familiarity with our particular establishment, but there were exceptions that defied normal logic. Regular patrons, those who understood the true nature of Moonrise Diner, always received priority, regardless of when they arrived. But more intriguingly, certain customers would appear during rush periods and somehow bypass the wait entirely, as if they'd reserved tables that didn't officially exist. These individuals would materialize in booths that I could have sworn were occupied just moments before, sitting as though they'd been there all evening. Agnes explained the priority system during a particularly busy Saturday night, when the diner filled beyond capacity. "Some folks have been coming here longer than this building has existed," she said while refilling coffee cups with mechanical precision. "They have arrangements, understandings that go back to before my time, maybe before anyone's time who's still breathing. I learned to recognize these special customers by their stillness, while regular patrons shifted in their seats, checked phones, or made conversation. The priority guests sat motionless as stone statues, their meals appearing before them, as if materializing from thin air. Dolores would prepare their orders without receiving tickets, somehow knowing exactly what each person required despite never seeing them place orders. The secret language of ticket placement became my obsession as I tried to understand the kitchen's mysterious efficiency. Order tickets weren't simply clipped to the rail in chronological sequence, as I'd experienced in other restaurants. Instead, Dolores arranged them according to a complex system that took into account factors I couldn't immediately identify. Some tickets were placed on the left side of the rail, others on the right. Certain orders were pinned with red clips, others with blue or green, and a few special orders received black clips that seemed to absorb the fluorescent light around them. During my 6th week, I made the mistake of reorganizing the tickets while Dolores stepped away to retrieve something from the walk-in cooler. I thought I was being helpful, arranging them in what seemed like logical order based on table numbers and arrival times. When she returned and saw what I'd done, her face drained of color so completely that I thought she might collapse. "Dios mío," she whispered, crossing herself repeatedly while frantically rearranging the tickets. "You have no idea what you almost did." Her hand shook as she restored the original order, muttering prayers in Spanish under her breath. "These aren't just food orders, Niño. They're contracts, agreements. Mess up the sequence, and we might serve the wrong meal to the wrong customer. And some of our customers don't forgive mistakes." The kitchen's atmosphere changed after that incident. Equipment that had hummed quietly began making irregular sounds. The fryer would bubble in rhythmic patterns that almost sounded like Morse code, and the grill would hiss in what seemed like whispered conversations. Dolores worked with increased intensity, her movements more precise than ever, as if compensating for the disturbance I created. What truly unnerved me was how the ticket system seemed to predict orders before customers placed them. New tickets would appear on the rail, even when the dining room was empty, and Dolores would begin preparing meals for guests who hadn't yet arrived. Without fail, within minutes of each dish reaching completion, the corresponding customer would walk through the front door and take their designated seat, as if summoned by the smell of their specifically prepared meal. One night, I watched her prepare a plate that defied description, something that looked like standard diner fare from a distance, but shifted and changed when viewed directly, as if my eyes couldn't quite process what they were seeing. The ticket for this order was clipped with a black pen and written in handwriting that seemed to move across the paper like living ink. When the customer arrived to claim this meal, I understood why Dolores commanded such respect in her domain. The figure that entered the diner stood nearly 7 feet tall, wearing a coat that seemed to absorb the light around it. When Dolores placed the plate before this customer, she performed what looked like a small bow, and the figure acknowledged her with a gesture that made the air temperature drop noticeably. After they finished eating, the plate was completely clean, as if it had never held food at all. As my 2nd month at Moonrise Diner progressed, I began to understand that Dolores wasn't just a cook. She was a guardian, maintaining balance through her careful preparation and precise attention to the unwritten protocols that kept our establishment running smoothly. Her authority wasn't derived from seniority or skill alone, but from her role as an intermediary between our world and something far more complex. The respect she commanded wasn't just professional courtesy. It was recognition of her position as the keeper of recipes and techniques that served purposes beyond simple nourishment. In her domain behind the grill, She orchestrated a delicate dance between the mundane and the supernatural, ensuring that every meal served its intended purpose in maintaining the fragile equilibrium that allowed Moonrise Diner to exist at the crossroads between two very different kinds of reality. The transformation that occurred at Moonrise Diner after midnight was so gradual that it took me weeks to fully comprehend its significance. As the clock hands approached 12, the entire atmosphere would shift like a theater changing between acts. The fluorescent lights seemed to dim without actually growing darker, and the air itself became thicker, charged with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand perpetually at attention. Late-night patrons arrived with an understanding of behavioral codes that no posted signs could explain. These weren't the raucous truckers or chatty insomniacs from earlier evening hours. After midnight, our customers moved with deliberate purpose, speaking in whispers when they spoke at all, and occupying space as if they were temporary visitors to a sacred location. Beth taught me to identify the regulars by their approach patterns. Watch how they enter, she instructed during a quiet Tuesday evening that preceded my first full midnight shift. The ones who belong here don't hesitate at the door. They don't scan the room looking for seating options. They know exactly where they're supposed to sit, and they move there directly, like they're following invisible pathways. The designated quiet booths were another mystery that revealed itself through observation rather than explanation. Certain seating areas, particularly the corner booths beneath the faded photographs of long-dead local celebrities, maintained an atmosphere of reverent silence. Customers who chose these locations communicated through subtle gestures, pointing at menu items rather than speaking, nodding their thanks instead of expressing gratitude verbally. During my 7th week, a group of college students stumbled into the diner around 1 a.m., clearly intoxicated and completely unaware of the unspoken protocols. They selected one of the quiet booths and began laughing loudly, playing music from their phones, and generally behaving as they would in any normal restaurant. The reaction from other patrons was immediate and unsettling. Every conversation in the diner ceased. Customers who had been eating calmly set down their utensils and turned toward the offending booth with expressions of barely contained irritation. Agnes approached the students with forced politeness, suggesting they might be more comfortable at the counter seats near the front window. When they refused to move, insisting they had every right to sit wherever they pleased, the temperature in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees. Within minutes, the college group began complaining of sudden headaches and nausea. One young woman claimed she felt like something was watching her from inside the walls. They left abruptly, abandoning their barely touched meals and fumbling with their car keys in obvious distress. After their departure, the other customers resumed their activities as if nothing had happened, but I noticed several of them nodding approvingly at Agnes, acknowledging her handling of the situation. The phantom tip protocol was perhaps the most intriguing aspect of our late-night service customs. Certain regular customers would leave exact payment for their meals in cash, placed carefully beneath their coffee cups or tucked under plate edges, never signing credit card receipts or interacting with our point-of-sale system. These payments were always precise down to the penny, including tax and an appropriate gratuity, as if calculated in advance according to some predetermined formula. What made this practice truly mysterious was that these cash payments sometimes included denominations that were no longer in circulation. I found mercury dimes, wheat pennies, and once a $2 bill so crisp it looked freshly printed despite bearing a date from 1953. When I mentioned these unusual payments to Agnes, she collected them carefully and locked them in a small metal box behind a register. Some of our customers pay with currency from when they first started coming here. She explained cryptically, "Time works differently for different folks. We accept their payments as they offer them, and somehow the register always balances at the end of each shift." The night shift operated according to rhythms that defied conventional understanding of restaurant service. Orders would arrive in the kitchen before customers placed them. Payments would appear on tables before bills were presented, and conversations would continue in corners long after the speakers had departed. Beth moved through the dining room like she was performing a choreographed routine, anticipating needs before they were expressed and fulfilling requests that were never verbally communicated. During the deepest part of each night shift, typically between 2 and 4 a.m., the diner would fill with a particular type of customer that I learned to recognize by their peculiar relationship with light and shadow. These individuals would occupy spaces where the fluorescent illumination seemed unable to penetrate fully, creating pockets of dimness that defied the laws of physics I thought I understood. Their presence was accompanied by subtle changes in the diner's ambience. The coffee maker would brew without being activated. The jukebox would play songs that weren't in its catalog, and the black and white television above the counter would display programming that didn't match any broadcast schedule I could find online. These phantom shows featured familiar actors who appeared decades younger than their known ages, advertising products that hadn't existed for generations. The most unsettling aspect of these late-night hours was how natural everything felt despite its impossibility. My rational mind recognized that the laws of reality were being bent or broken, but some deeper instinct accepted these phenomena as normal operating procedures. I began to understand that Moonrise Diner existed in a space where conventional rules held limited authority, and the night shift staff served as intermediaries between different layers of existence. By my 8th week, I had developed an intuitive understanding of the silent symphony that governed our overnight operations. I could sense when certain booths needed to remain unoccupied, anticipate which customers required the night blend coffee, and identify the subtle signals that indicated when someone needed to settle their bill without being directly asked. The job had become less about serving food and more about maintaining harmony in a space where multiple realities intersected. As dawn approached each morning, the supernatural tension would gradually dissipate, returning the diner to its daytime normalcy. But the knowledge of what occurred during those midnight hours remained, creating a shared understanding among the night shift staff that connected us in ways that transcended typical workplace relationships. We were custodians of something larger than a simple roadside restaurant, guardians of a delicate balance that kept our corner of rural Texas functioning as a bridge between worlds that most people never knew existed. The dessert service at Moonrise Diner revealed layers of complexity that made our other protocols seem simple by comparison. The glass-fronted pie case near the register displayed the standard offerings you'd expect from any rural Texas establishment: apple, cherry, chocolate cream, and coconut. But for certain customers, dessert options extended far beyond what casual observers could see. Dolores prepared what she called special occasion pies in the hours before dawn, working with ingredients that didn't appear on any supply order I'd ever processed. These creations were stored in a separate cooler unit behind the main kitchen, one that required a key Agnes kept on a chain around her neck. The pies themselves defied easy description. Some seemed to shift color depending on viewing angle. Others appeared to contain more filling than their crusts could physically accommodate. During my 9th week, I witnessed the unofficial dessert offering process when Ezra, our regular Tuesday customer, finished his standard meal and continued sitting in his corner booth rather than departing as usual. Beth approached his table, carrying a slice of pie that hadn't been visible in the display case moments before. The filling had a deep purple color that seemed to swirl with its own internal movement, and the crust appeared to be made from some type of grain I couldn't identify. "On the house tonight, honey," Beth said, placing the plate before Ezra with the same careful reverence I'd observed during other specialized services. Ezra nodded his appreciation and began eating the pie with obvious satisfaction. With each bite, his appearance seemed to become more solid, more present, as if the dessert was anchoring him to our reality in some fundamental way. Agnes explained the access system during a quiet period between the midnight rush and pre-dawn service. Some folks need more than regular food, she said while checking the special cooler's contents. They come here carrying hungers that can't be satisfied with standard fare. These pies serve different purposes. Some provide sustenance that lasts weeks instead of hours. Others offer experiences that can't be found anywhere else. The timing protocol for these special desserts operated according to rules that seemed to bend temporal logic. Customers who qualified for off-menu treats would arrive with perfect synchronization to when their specific pies reached optimal serving condition. The purple-filled creation Ezra consumed was apparently available only on Tuesday nights between 2:15 and 2:30 a.m., while other varieties had their own precise windows of opportunity. I learned to recognize eligible customers by subtle signs that weren't immediately obvious. Their orders would be paid for with currency that aged differently than normal money. Bills that felt somehow heavier than modern paper. Coins that maintained temperatures independent of their environment. More significantly, these individuals cast reflections that arrived at mirrors slightly before they did, and their shadows sometimes moved independently of their bodies. The protocol for determining freshness versus accepting counter-offerings involved understanding each customer's specific needs and preferences. Some of our special patrons require desserts prepared within the previous hour. Their supernatural metabolisms demanding absolute peak freshness for optimal effect. Others preferred pies that had been seasoned through sitting, developing complexity and potency through controlled aging in the special cooler. Beth demonstrated the assessment process during a busy Friday night when multiple special customers arrived simultaneously. She would approach each table and study the patron carefully, sometimes holding brief, whispered conversations in languages I didn't recognize. Based on these consultations, she would either return with fresh slices or select portions from pies that had been waiting for days or even weeks. It's not about what looks best, she explained while preparing a slice from a pie that appeared to contain miniature storm clouds instead of traditional filling. It's about matching the dessert's development stage to what each customer needs. Some folks are looking for energy, others want memories, and a few need help transitioning between different states of existence. The shared condiment caddy etiquette represented another layer of complexity in dessert service. The standard containers of sugar, artificial sweetener, and powdered cinnamon were accompanied by additional options that weren't visible to casual observers. Special customers could access containers of substances that enhanced their dessert experience in ways that defied conventional understanding of food additives. These enhanced condiments were stored in containers identical to the standard offerings, but they could only be seen and accessed by individuals who had achieved a certain level of familiarity with Moonrise Diner's true nature. I watched regular customers sprinkle what appeared to be ordinary sugar onto their pie slices, but the granules would shimmer and dissolve in patterns that created temporary images in the dessert filling. Faces, landscapes, scenes from times and places that seemed to exist outside normal history. The proper etiquette involved using these special condiments sparingly and returning the containers to their exact original positions after use. Customers who violated this protocol would find their dessert experience diminished, their pie reverting to ordinary food that provided standard nutrition, but none of the supernatural benefits they sought. During my 10th week, I made the mistake of attempting to use one of the enhanced condiments on a regular piece of apple pie during my break. The moment the crystals touched the filling, my vision blurred, and I found myself experiencing vivid flashbacks to memories that weren't my own. Scenes of the diner from decades past, conversations between customers who had died before I was born, and glimpses of events that might represent possible futures rather than documented history. Agnes found me sitting motionless at the counter 20 minutes later, the pie untouched despite the fact that I had no memory of stopping eating. "Those aren't meant for folks like us," she said gently while removing the plate. "We're here to serve, not to partake." Some experiences are reserved for customers who've earned access through longer journeys than ours. The restoration process took hours, during which my perception of time and space remained unstable. Colors seemed more vivid than they should be. Sounds carried meanings beyond their literal content, and I could sense the emotional states of everyone in the diner, as if their feelings were visible in the air around them. The effect gradually faded as dawn approached, but the experience left me with a deeper appreciation for the careful boundaries that governed our establishment. By the end of my 10th week, I understood that the pecan pie protocol represented more than specialized customer service. It was a complex system for providing experiences and sustenance that couldn't be obtained through conventional means. The desserts served purposes that ranged from simple nutritional supplementation to profound metaphysical transformation, and our role as staff was to facilitate these transactions while maintaining the delicate balance that allowed such impossibilities to function within the framework of a seemingly ordinary roadside diner. The knowledge that some hungers could only be satisfied through carefully prepared offerings that existed at the intersection of culinary art and supernatural science added weight to every dessert service. Each slice of pie represented a responsibility to maintain traditions and protocols that had evolved over generations, ensuring that Moonrise Diner could continue serving customers whose needs extended far beyond the ordinary spectrum of human appetite. The final weeks of my employment at Moonrise Diner brought revelations that transformed my understanding of everything I thought I knew about the establishment and my role within its strange ecosystem. The knowing glance from Beth became my most reliable indicator that a customer's visit was reaching its natural conclusion, but I learned that these signals meant far more than simple payment reminders. Beth possessed an almost supernatural awareness of each patron's temporal requirements. She could sense when someone had absorbed enough of the diner's unique atmosphere to satisfy their purposes, when their presence was beginning to strain the delicate balance that kept our reality stable, or when their continued stay might attract unwanted attention from forces that even our seasoned staff preferred to avoid. During my 11th week, I witnessed a perfect example of this intuitive timing when a customer I'd never seen before occupied booth 7 for nearly 6 hours. He appeared to be an ordinary traveling salesman, working on a laptop and occasionally ordering coffee refills, but something about his presence made the air around his table shimmer like heat waves rising from summer pavement. Beth monitored his table throughout the night, refilling his cup precisely every 47 minutes without being asked. Around 4 a.m., she approached me with an expression of focused concentration. "Watch his reflection in the window behind him," she whispered. "When it starts moving independently, I'll give him the look, and he'll know it's time to settle up." The phenomenon she described was subtle, but unmistakable once I knew what to observe. The customer's reflection began performing actions that didn't match his physical movements, typing on a laptop that wasn't there, drinking from cups that remained full on the real table, consulting documents that existed only in the mirrored world. When Beth caught his eye and delivered the knowing glance, he immediately closed his laptop and reached for his wallet with obvious understanding. The "don't ask" policy governed inquiries about the diner's history, previous employees, and certain regular customers who might or might not still be technically alive. Agnes enforced this rule with gentle but absolute authority, deflecting questions about the building's past, the identity of people in the faded photographs, and the origins of our more unusual protocols. My curiosity about these forbidden topics reached its peak during my 12th week when I discovered a collection of employee photographs in the storage room. The images spanned decades, showing staff members in uniforms that evolved with changing fashions, but several faces appeared in multiple photos, taken years apart, without showing any signs of aging. When I brought these pictures to Agnes, her reaction was immediate and decisive. "Some questions don't have answers that living folks can safely know," she said while locking the photographs in the same metal box where she stored unusual currency. "The diner has been serving travelers for longer than official records indicate, and some of our former staff members continue their duties in ways that don't require regular paychecks. Asking too many questions about these arrangements can result in unexpected career changes." The weight of her warning was reinforced by the behavior of our regular customers, who seemed to understand instinctively which topics were acceptable for discussion and which subjects required absolute silence. Conversations at the quiet booths sometimes referenced events from decades past, spoken of in present tense, as if they were ongoing rather than historical. But these discussions would cease immediately if anyone outside the established customer base approached within hearing distance. The silent promise to return represented the most profound aspect of the Lone Star farewell ritual. This wasn't simply customer loyalty or satisfaction with service quality. It was recognition of a connection that transcended normal business relationships. The look exchange between departing customers and staff carried implications that reached far beyond promises of future visits. During my final scheduled shift, Ezra taught me the true significance of this ritual through demonstration rather than explanation. As he prepared to leave after his standard Tuesday meal and special dessert, he caught my eye and held my gaze for several seconds longer than social convention typically allows. In that extended moment, I experienced a flash of understanding that bypassed rational thought entirely. The silent promise wasn't about returning to eat again. It was acknowledgement that both parties understood the diner's true nature and accepted their roles in maintaining its function. Customers who made this promise became part of an extended network of individuals committed to preserving the establishment's ability to serve as a bridge between different layers of reality. Staff members who recognized and accepted these promises took on responsibilities that extended beyond their official employment. Agnes confirmed my interpretation during the post-shift cleanup that marked the end of my 3-month probationary period. "You've learned the rules well enough to understand why they exist," she said while counting the evening's receipts, including the vintage currency that somehow always balanced perfectly with our modern accounting system. "The question now is whether you're ready to make your own promise to return." The choice she presented wasn't simply about continuing employment at Moonrise Diner. It was about accepting a position in something larger and more complex than a normal workplace. Staff members who made the commitment would find their lives increasingly intertwined with the establishment's supernatural functions. They might receive calls to come in during emergencies that existed outside conventional definitions, assist customers whose needs required services that weren't listed in any employee handbook, or discover that their understanding of time and space had been permanently altered through prolonged exposure to the diner's unique atmosphere. As dawn broke over the Texas landscape and my shift officially ended, I stood in the parking lot looking back at the diner through the large front windows. Inside, the morning shift was arriving to prepare for the day's regular customers, but I could still see traces of the overnight transformation lingering in the corners where shadows gather more deeply than physics should allow. The decision Agnes had presented wasn't one that required immediate resolution, but I understood that it would have to be made soon. The knowledge I'd gained about Moonrise Diner's true nature created a responsibility that couldn't be ignored or forgotten. Whether I chose to deepen my involvement with the establishment or attempt to return to a conventional understanding of reality, the experience had fundamentally changed my perception of the world's hidden complexities. Walking to my car that final morning, I realized that the rules I'd learned weren't arbitrary restrictions or quirky traditions. They were carefully developed protocols for navigating a space where multiple realities intersected. The bizarre nature of working the night shift at a rural Texas roadside diner had revealed truths about the universe that most people never encountered, and the responsibility for maintaining that knowledge would remain with me regardless of whatever decision I ultimately made about my future employment. The silent promise wasn't just about returning to work another shift. It was about accepting that some experiences change you in ways that make returning to ordinary life impossible, and that sometimes the most important choices are the ones that commit you to responsibilities you never knew existed.